is going to become more and more unaffordable, as comedic as that is. And any concern for public health generally has always been secondary to monetary gain, but now we see it in its most fruitful manifestation. The stat for unemployment at the moment in the U.S. is about 9%, over 9%, but that's actually not really true. It's mostly about 18 to 20% if you actually regard those that are underemployed in aggregate or that are off the record. Just as the U.S. and many governments appear in all their seriousness about job creation, if I hear one more election thing about, ooh, how can he make jobs? I mean, because it's such a belligerent statement. There's nothing that anybody in a political position can do to create jobs. It's an economic notion that's based on a certain type of causality, and the core of that flaw, which I'm about to get into, cannot be altered by any type of governmental policy unless you override the entire economic system. What we have is this thing called mechanization, which basically is increasing cost efficiency for corporations. And because corporations want to save money, and because of the exponential increase in science and technology, if anyone here has studied people like Ray Kurzweil or the Singularity Institute, you see echoes of this nuance even though they don't address the social problem. What we have is a process where labor is becoming obsolete on the human level. We have become too efficient in our creation of machines, and there's new announcements of McDonald's and many other organizations that are starting to, because they're losing money, starting to automate very, very quickly. But yet, what does that do? It reduces your purchasing power. It reduces the number of people employed. It's a self-stifling manifestation which proves the outdated and irrelevant nature of the system that we have today as it's progressed. It's being evolved out of, I'll put it that way. And on a different level, since our economy is completely based on hydrocarbons, as I'm sure most know, and not just for transport, but for packaging and everything else, which of course are not only unsafe, but on the verge of destabilizing scarcity, at least from a psychological perspective. Do you really think that any country right now, as much as everyone's talking about energy on the sidelines as well, along with labor, along with debt, do you think that any country is prepared to make the financial commitment for the creation of the abundant renewables that are really needed? The cost of infrastructure changes globally has been estimated by the Global Energy, one of the major global energy, international global energy institutions, sorry, I can't remember the name right now, to be roughly between 20 and 30 trillion dollars. And that's with a tremendous commitment coming from governments. And while, again, we're surrounded by tons of well-meaning activist groups, and I always shy away from criticizing any group out there that's trying to do something good, you really notice that virtually none of them ever talk about the true foundation of the problem, which is the monetary market system itself as the cause of these problems, whether environmental or social or so-called political. It doesn't even occur to them because they're kind of in the box, and they spend all their time combating organizations and institutions. Someone came up to me earlier, made a comment of something I had said earlier. It's like we can keep, stomping on the cockroaches as they come out from underneath the refrigerator, but until you remove the spoiled food behind it, you're not really resolving anything. And the entire process of activism right now is really us doing just that. And this brings us to this social immune system, as I think is a great way to put it, which is what the Zeitgeist movement really is hoping to manifest. We're here to try and do something before we get to this tipping point where everyone's so backs against the wall, where the wars are on edge, where the scarcity is extreme, where no one can even, the technical breakdown of society, if you will, something that really hasn't been faced yet. The Great Depression was nothing compared to what's in store for the U.S. and most of the Western world and society as a whole if massive structural changes aren't made over the course of the next decade, which could be accelerated very, very quickly in the case of certain accents, if you will, like a major natural disaster in certain regions where they have no funding to do anything. So the term the Zeitgeist movement is defined as the general intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of an era. The term movement simply implies motion or change. The Zeitgeist movement, therefore, is an organization which urges change in the dominant intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of the time. Changes in our method of social operation always mean changes in our values. And the revolution, if you will, has always been a revolution of values to begin with, which was what makes this communication project so incredibly important and difficult. People always want to talk math and building and structure, but the movement's here in many ways to just get people on board with the fundamental relationship of intent, to understand, at least accept, the nature of what values are important and will sustain us, and then we begin to extract our systems approach from those values, and hopefully they'll relate to something real. Very briefly, and this is where I started last month. I did an expression where I read this statement, then I defined it. I'm going to do it again, but very, very rapidly. The Zeitgeist movement, what is our goal? We seek a new economic model based not on the movement of money and the dynamics associated, but rather on truly objective scientific resource management and allocation, strategically seeking to enable an equitable distribution of all goods and services to meet the needs of the entire global human population while ensuring maximum environmental sustainability over generational time. Very quickly, we say economic model, meaning it must be about strategic preservation and sustainability, which is what the word economy really implies. We say not the movement of money because of its inherent intent, which is decoupled from true life support. We say the need for scientific resource management and allocation because the scientific method is the only form of reasoning that exists with respect to predictable, truthful, and responsible understandings and outcomes. And we say an equitable distribution of all goods because true social stability and hence our safety, from whatever definition you can come out with, can only arise if the world's population has its needs met. And finally, we say, while ensuring maximum environmental sustainability, because obviously a true economic model, again, demands the symbiosis and the interconnectivity and relationship to what actually supports us. Our connection to the earth and its natural laws will only be misunderstood at our complete detriment. Out of this, we get a new train of thought, which arrives at a model that really becomes quite self-evident if you frame your point of reference from the life ground, meaning things that actually support life, and for the enabling of the goals that we just described, essentially, which hopefully everyone, I think, would value when they think about it. Number one, we need to move into a move from a growth economy to a steady state economy. The very idea of infinite growth, which is what we do on any level, is just plain insane. It's a pyramid scheme that's collapsing. That big debt chart is really the result of a very long pyramid scheme, which can only fail. We don't want people talking about growth all the time. It's really wacky when you actually look at this rhetoric that comes out of the political and economic sphere. Number two, we need to get away from the competitive basis and realize that collaboration is the only intelligent manner of operation. In fact, at the core of the basic economic theory of competition is the idea that it produces a collaboratory environment, which I find so hilariously paradoxical if you think about it, because they're assuming that the invisible hand, that somehow this self-interest mechanism will promote the larger order balance, again, which is ridiculous. We need a collaborative environment, devising a systems approach to Earth management and society as a whole. We can no longer operate based on cost, efficiency, and self-preservation. We need to literally calculate society in a responsible way, which is a very empirical and objective thought process. Three, we need a planned system where ideas of localization and energy reduction, eliminating waste, these become obvious needs. Globalization that we've all come to know is got to be one of the most wasteful and offensive things that we've come up with. The very concept is really based on societal manipulation, exploitation of labor in deprived countries for the sake of cost efficiency. And the very idea that we get strawberries from Chile and water from Fiji, this is really bizarre. Number four, we need to focus on deliberate automation, as I alluded to prior. If this is a new subject to some of you, please type in technological unemployment, and you'll find some very interesting debates on this issue. Every major change of human society has come from technology and scientific ingenuity. Otherwise, we'd all still be farming with big wood plows right now. And everything that manifests our value systems has come from technological interference and evolution, if you will, one way or another. So we have to focus on deliberate automation because that's simply responsible, because we can produce more. And what we have is that the paradigm shifted away from human labor as the core foundation of social operation. It's now obsolete. And number 5, we need to devise a system that actually shares and allows less to be produced, but yet more to be utilized. And it seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? If we produce less, is there really more to go around? But if you actually think of a structural system where people are sharing things like automobiles in a very sophisticated manner, or sharing different forms of goods. I'm a filmmaker, I have closets full of film equipment I'd rather not own because it takes up lots of space. I can't rent it because it's not cost efficient for me, because I need the investment of it, because I can't just rent it every time. It costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. I might as well buy it, as they say. But I have to hoard it all. I'd rather be able to just gain access to it and then return it. And imagine a system like that for a second. You could see a robustness of access, robustness of caring about society more so when people have that sort of connection, and so forth. This is how you would create an access abundance that you'll often see commented on in our materials. And this very brief description is kind of coalesces into this concept that we loosely define as a resource-based economic model as opposed to a monetary or market-based economic model. And this is a terminology that you'll find, a resource-based economy. The name is a good way to reference it. What it means is you come from the ground up, from a resource-based approach. You actually understand your environment and the laws that you are, well, govern you, along with everything else around you. And you begin to build a system based on that, with the necessity for sustainability over generational time. That's kind of the loosest way I could describe it. And I'll conclude by saying that in the midst of all of this, and I'm sure there's tons of questions that can be built upon this, especially if this is very new to you, is that the greatest barrier when you talk about these things, again, is people's values, as I mentioned earlier. There are so many interesting ways people defend attributes of this system because of everything that they've grown to understand and relate to. If I was to tell a very prominent economist, PhD, in such ideas, the majority of the time I do interact with people of such a nature, they tend to dismiss it without any type of technical argument at all. They have a block. They have an emotional block that goes up. And if there's anything I'll leave you with, which is probably the basis of this movement, again, as I mentioned, is that those that do want to advocate this concept need to begin to know how to deal with those that set up these emotional blocks against you. And that is really the fundamental problem, the mind lock. This is what has stifled us throughout history. You go back to Socrates, these guys, the ancient Ionian Greeks, they had slavery, yet they were supposed to be the highest peak of intellectual society. You go back to Pythagoras, who, brilliant mind, the sacred geometry, it was a religious notion, that people worship Pythagoras, literally. It was whatever Pythagoras said. You see the echoes of this nuance, and you have to think forward and say to yourself, okay, what are the belief systems we have now, and how erroneous are they going to seem to us 100 years from now? And that's the type of frame of reference that I hope I can leave you with. So thank you very much.